No more fresh credit cards will be issued by Kotak Mahindra Bank. But it's not just that. They also cannot get new customers online or through their banking apps. That means no app, no mobile, no digital onboarding of customers. Now, why is that important? Because about 90% of all the new customers for Kotak Mahindra Bank, like a lot of the industry, do come online. The reason is why? The reason is because of IT issues. The RBI found serious deficiencies in the IT system of Kotak Mahindra Bank and has been dealing with them for 2 years. They failed their IT compliance test that RBI routinely has for all banks. They were asked to fix things. They could not, and hence they had to come and take this action. Now, before we get into the details of implications, etc., and also the NDTV Profit exclusive, there are some big questions that I would like to pose. Number one, should it take a large bank like Kotak Mahindra over 3 years to fix IT issues? The management says they will resolve the issues shortly. My clear question is, why couldn't they do it so far? Why should a company with profits over 15,000 crores be deficient in IT systems? Were the right investments not being made? Was it not being given enough attention? And also, should the RBI have stepped in earlier if customers were being onboarded in large numbers with what the RBI clearly thinks is a deficient IT system? In fact, that seems to be part of the problem. As more and more transactions happen digitally and online, the bank system was not able to handle the load. Should the RBI also clarify if there is a risk to customer data? Because in its communication, it talks about, among other things, concerns with data security. What does that really mean for customers? We're going to get into all of those details, but I want to go across first to my colleague Pragati, who's been tracking this story very, very closely. Pragati, it seems the April 15th outage, which was the latest in a series of outages, as far as Kotak Mahindra Bank is concerned, was perhaps the last straw. And that really was the problem, isn't it? The whole system wouldn't work for customers.
Yeah. Right, Tamanna, you're absolutely right. So April 15 was just one of the first or one of the latest instances, but sources told us that these instances were actually very, very common and they were happening frequently over the last 2 or 3 years. And that was one of the reasons or concerns that the RBI had with the bank, apart from 4 others. But before we delve into that, I would like to inform our viewers this latest NDTV Profit exclusive, that because after the RBI imposed curbs on the bank's new CEO, that is Mr. Ashok Vaswani, has also sent an email to the employees, and that's the latest exclusive that we have for you. Sources told us, in fact, we also reviewed a copy of the email that Mr. Vaswani wrote to the employees, and he said that there is a need of a better IT infrastructure because there has been an explosive growth in the business via all these channels, and that is the reason they need a completely different level of tech infra. In fact, he has also acknowledged the efforts of all Kotak employees, but he has said that the bank will work closely in order to find solutions to the latest problem. Now, let me take a step back now. This was the latest update that we had for you. Let me take a step back now and come to what is the core issue or what caused the entire mess at Kotak Mahindra Bank. In the morning as well, we brought this exclusive to our viewers that there were 5 main points or main issues that the RBI faced with Kotak Mahindra Bank. We have that on screen for viewers. One is the scalability. The next is multiple outages. Third is the detail of these outages. Fourth is the inadequate tech infra. And fifth is an additional contributor to the issues, that is the high volume UPI transactions. If we have to go in depth for all these points, one would be the scalability of the core banking system at the core of this issue. Now, sources told us that while the IT audits or inspections were going on for last 2 to 3 years at Kotak Mahindra Bank, the scalability of the core banking issue or the inability of the core banking system to come to a scale level in order to handle the bulk of these transactions was at the core of this issue.
Understand this is important, and let's understand this point by point and in simple terms. When you say scalability, essentially the rate at which new customers are coming on versus what the system could handle was
Yeah.
just a complete mismatch, isn't it?
Yes, that's what sources made us understand in simple terms, that the system was not, at least in terms of size or efficiency, was not equipped enough. The customer onboarding or the number of transactions and the volume of transactions was much larger than what the system could actually handle. In fact, we have an instance also here on our screen as an example. Sources told us that about 30 to 40 hours of outages were being reported in a year.
Say outages, that means at that point the customer cannot access their account, apps, etc. Is that the impact of outages?
Yes, in broader terms, yes, we can say that. That would be an umbrella way to put it, because these outages, when we are saying 30 to 40 hours of outages, these outages are a broad umbrella word. Why? It can include inadequate UPI transactions, transaction failure, inability to log into the mobile banking app, and so on and so forth.
You know, just you talked about the management's commentary. I'm just wondering if they're saying anything or explaining anything on why they couldn't fix it all of this time. Because that's really the question. It's a large bank.
Yeah. So what we have gathered so far is that they did have multiple action plans in place, and they were submitting those reports to the RBI, and there was a constant conversation happening between the regulator and the bank. In fact, sources also told us, it's a very interesting point, Tamanna, that they said that they were on the verge of completing all the changes that they had planned to introduce, but the clampdown happened right before that. So while we don't have the exact details of the timeline, but they did indicate that to us.
No,
in various
I mean that's like saying, you know, I couldn't finish my exam paper before the invigilator took away the paper. I mean, the fact is that when the bell rings, and the RBI has decided to clamp down. We'll come back to you for more Pragati, but meanwhile, let's get our conversation going. We're joined now by Abizar Divanji of EY India Financial Services leader. Abizar, great to have you on the show. And thank you so much for speaking with us today, because we want to begin with understanding the magnitude of action that has been taken against Kotak Mahindra Bank. Remember, the RBI also acted against HDFC Bank in the past for IT issues. Is this action much more than HDFC Bank?
No, well, there's no question of it being larger. There is no evidence to actually prove that it's any larger or lesser than that. I think the larger issue here is that banks are going through a transformation where they are digitizing the whole banking process, especially the retail banking process. And as part of that process, I think procedures are changing quite significantly. Be it HDFC, be it Kotak, I think it's all the same, or be it even IIFL or JM when we saw earlier in the NBFC space. So what's really happening is that there is a new way of getting more and more customers onboarded, more and more transactions being done digitally. Customers are being assessed, approached, and sanctioned or banked with digitally now. And that has changed a whole lot of processes in every bank. And like in every change in process over a period of time, there will be lapses that will happen in the processes, which are a constructive way of moving towards best processes. The best way to look at this is to make sure that every entity which is being audited or governed, every audit entity which is not yet audited but yet to be audited, as well as the regulator, needs to take this as a constructive process of remediating the bad processes and making sure that we move in a continuous path towards making sure that digitization happens. It's happening everywhere in every industry. Banking has taken the lead, and because banking or financial services is a highly regulated industry, we are seeing more and more of regulator intervention in that. But apart from that, I don't see that as one being of a higher magnitude than the other at all.
No, what I mean when I say higher magnitude, I mean in terms and context of the RBI's action. The action the RBI has taken against Kotak Mahindra Bank versus what it took versus HDFC Bank. Is this of a higher magnitude?
That may be, but so there is existing customers who continue to be serviced, whether it is credit card customers or existing bank customers. Now, all it says is that take a pause in the process that you're doing, try and remediate that, and then move ahead and do it. And I think it's a constructive process where the regulator has to understand the bank and the bank has to understand the regulator and arrive at a mid path, which is called the remediation path, which is acceptable to both, and move on. Now, the thing is, what is acceptable to both is a big issue, because normally the enterprise gets more aggressive in terms of moving towards a digital path. The regulator tends to be more conservative, but the path is somewhere in the middle, and that is what the remediation needs to be arrived at. So it's, it's made out that, I can understand what happened to a Paytm bank, which said stop operations. I think that would have been a drasticer measure. But when you talk about saying suspend operations so that you can rationalize and get back on track after consensual recommendations are implemented, that's I think a fair regulatory process in terms of the learning between the regulator and the regulated.
The question though, Abhizar, is how was this taking 2 years? Why should it take 2 years? And those are some of the big questions that we've posed. How do we look at it? Does this mean that the bank was not taking it seriously when the RBI kept saying that this is not working out or this is deficient? Or did the RBI act harshly and decide to make an example of Kotak Mahindra Bank?
So what happens here is that because these are all newer processes and digitization, as is everything else, is a very, very discovered or discovery in the process of being discovered process. What's really happened as part of that is that the banks would normally have a particular point of view of what is sufficient for them. The regulator on his part will have a particular view of what is sufficient of them. Now, what happens sometimes is that in a particular situation, the regulator as well as the bank may interpret a situation very differently. It could also be possible that in different situations, the regulator may be interpreting something differently for different banks. So ideally, because this standardization itself is an evolutionary process and takes time, one has to give it that time to happen. To say, oh, I did not follow rules for 2 years is not the answer. The answer is that there was an interpretation which I had. There is an interpretation that you had. I tried to mend it by a particular way which I thought would be sufficient for the regulator, which the regulator possibly did not think was sufficient. So it's going to be a dialogue process between the two of them to resolve. And I think, frankly, this is like, we are going towards a path where banks and financial institutions who have adopted digitization and are at an advanced stage of adopting are actually paving the way for a smoother highway for the others to come through. So there will be, a lot of impediments in between, a lot of remediation to be done in between, and the process has to be taken constructively. That's all I would say.
All right, stay on with us, Abhizar. I'm also inviting Ashwin Parekh, Managing Partner of APAS, to the show. We're speaking with Gurmeet Chadda of Complete Circles PMS today. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for joining us as we try to dissect and understand really what the issues are over here. Gurmeet, let me begin with you. And a variety of views, especially in the market, on how much this will impact Kotak Mahindra Bank. Obviously, sentimentally it has, the stock has reacted negatively, etc. But the question is, what is it telling us about the ability of the bank to scale up the way it wants to? And why this extent of deficiency? This is a very core and basic kind of requirement.
It is surprising, Tamanna, and it's not restricted to Kotak alone. If you see HDFC, Axis, leading private banks, there are frequent outages. Most of the time, the servers are down, especially during month ends. And I'm actually surprised. HDFC does 70,000 crores of quarterly PAT. Kotak does 3,500 crores. ICICI has 10,000 crore PAT. So the IT spending has to pick up. And this is not something which is new. And if you see the observations, they have also highlighted the 5 points where they found, the observations. One was inventory management. Second was user access. Then they pointed out to vendor management. And they also pointed out to data security. So there were 5 areas and this is not the first bank. HDFC had a similar issue a couple of years back, took almost 18 months to fix it. So what this does is that in this new digital world, while the current impact looks limited, the growth gets impacted. So let's say out of the saving accounts they have been opening, 70% of them are being digitally opened, especially with the 811 scheme. Personal loans, most of them are digitally disbursed. Credit cards, 99% are digitally now originated and done. So, and there is a big impact on the liability sides. We are just looking at cards being only 4%. It's not as simple as that. I think the message from RBI to all banks is very clear. This is not just Kotak. I'm just putting all private banks. Is that you have to increase spending on digital infrastructure, make systems more robust.
Yeah,
I
but
work with
my
Citibank.
question is, Gurmeet, why not? It's not like these banks have no profitability or are doing very badly or are doing very poorly. They are extremely profitable enterprises. I don't understand why they wouldn't spend. It's definitely not a question of budget. Is it a lack of understanding to the extent to which they needed to comply?
No, it's a combination of banks being slow to react and like the explosive growth we are seeing digitally. I don't think so. The kind of for example, look at UPI transactions. This is one of the another area RBI is highlighted. Also, the growth has been very high. And Kotak in particular, the growth has been more digital. Unlike HDFC, which is let's say adding 800 branches a year, Kotak is more like 50 to 80 branches a year. Right? So they've been relying more on digital. So I think it's both the pace of the growth and the bank's ability to catch up with it. And India hasn't seen those fines, Tamanna. I've worked with Citibank. There were billions of dollars of fine on, and Citi never had a issue till now, despite they leaving India. So I think the banks now need to realize that the future is digital, and I think the message is loud and clear. And I agree with you. I am surprised. Had it been a tier 2 bank, it's okay. But the likes of Kotak, which are marquee banks, very high on governance, great leadership, it does come in as a surprise.
Ashwin Parekh, great to have you on the show. Just wanted your take on what the message is from RBI, what it's telling us about Kotak Mahindra Bank and how they will have to really pull up their socks very, very quickly. I mean, we've got that exclusive excerpt from the management on what they plan to do next. They say they will fix it. My question is, what is your takeaway when for over 2 years this problem persists and you don't manage to do anything about it?
So, see, let's look at, the issue on hand. One, of course, is when you're dealing with whether it's onboarding or whether you're really conducting the transactions, assisting the customers to conduct the transactions. When you're doing it online, one thing becomes very particular. See, if you ever use, let's say, for example, any one of those platforms, payment platforms, one bank, the debit bank, will normally debit your account. And then the other bank has to really complete the transaction by accepting and putting it in the account of the payer. The trouble in case of online banking is that if you make the other leg of transaction wait, then the transaction does not get completed. Customers feel very frustrated. Sometimes you wait, let's say on these platforms, whether you're making an online payment or whether you're making even a QR code or a UPI payment, for instance. If you make the customer wait, it becomes very difficult. And then if you reject the transaction, in the sense on account of technology outages, then it does become very complicated. So that was one part of the whole story. The second is, in this day and age, when we know that we have to handle a large number of transactions, online transactions, and they have to happen on a real-time basis, outages can cause a lot of trouble, not only to the customers, but also to the system. And there are systemic issues that can arise, basically. So, I would certainly say that there are concepts. Like, for example, peak transactions, and when you build your capacity, your scalability is one of the issues we talked about. You build your capacity in keeping with that. You continuously monitor that your scalability is at least 2 to 3 times the peak transactions that you have in a day. And you have to make sure that each and every application that you have with your core banking is well aligned, basically. So I would still believe that 3 years is a little bit of a too long period. All the excuses about the fact that the number of transactions has gone up or whatever can be very valid if you had a situation like this for 3-4 months and you start paying more attention to it. So 3 years or 2 years, or I think
exactly. I think there's a lot to be answered in terms of why Kotak has had this lapse and what the reason is. We'll take a very short break. When we come back, we talk about the RBI's slew of actions. Remember, Kotak is only the latest in line. What is the message the regulator is giving? We'll come back with that after this break.
Have you been struggling with your personal finances? You're not alone. There are a lot of people out there that find it difficult to manage their money. But on Big Decisions, we'll be discussing a variety of topics that will help you make your financial decisions with confidence. Check it out on any of our social media platforms, the television channel, on the website ndtvprofit.com, or in fact, on any of the podcast platforms out there.
Okay, welcome back. We're talking about Kotak Mahindra Bank, and I just want to quickly take you through this timeline of all of the action that the RBI has taken in the recent past in the banking system. Kotak Mahindra Bank is one of the latest. It's not as if the RBI has not taken action previously. December 2020, they asked HDFC Bank to stop all forthcoming digital business generating activities. It took, remember, HDFC Bank over a year to fix this, and assessment is that it's going to take Kotak Mahindra Bank also upward of 12 months to fix the issues that the RBI sees. Remember, HDFC Bank was also asked to stop sourcing new credit card customers in December 2020. Through then and after then, you've seen action on a variety of financial institutions, whether it's Paytm, whether it's Bajaj Finance, and of course, the latest being Kotak Mahindra Bank. Gurmeet Chadda, I want to come to you on, what is the message that the regulator is giving? And does that make investments in banks a bit of a risky proposition, because you never know when this is going to come up?
See, financial will always have a regulatory risk, especially in the digital age. I think the only answer to that is diversification. On if this can happen to Kotak and HDFC, no entity is safe from regulatory supervision. And I believe the entire industry needs to take note of this, that this is a new era. The business has to be done differently. I think also it could lead to a bit of re-rating and de-rating in few counters. You're assigned a 4 or 5 book value on the growth you do and your pristine asset quality, which Kotak and in general HDFC have also been there. Now, if there's any ban on digital front, will impact growth. I mean, while we are being short-sighted if we are saying that the financial impact is limited now, but in terms of growth, if you're a 4 book value, you have to grow at 20-25%, and digital was forming a large part of growth for most of the private banks. So I think first is the price correction which happens, and then there is a bit of a time correction and maybe a bit of derating, because these issues take time to fix. I don't see issue getting fixed so easily. However quick be the response, there is an external audit. So I think the message is clear. There is no compromise on digital ecosystem. You have to spend more on data security. And I think the entire industry probably needs to come up. I am actually a little surprised. I had a look at some of the IT budgets for a lot of the large banks, and I must say that they are very short of what they should be.
Wait 1 minute. I'm interested in that. So what did you find? You went and looked at the IT budgets of these banks, Gurmeet. You think they're not spending enough?
Absolutely not. It's visible, Tamanna. You don't have to put numbers to it. Just go to any branch every week, see the number of times servers are down. The recent was the year end. I mean, from 28th, 29th April, March, when you had a year end, so many outages. There was a couple of days back, message from HDFC Bank that net banking is down. So I think this has become normal. It's like, that call drops in telecom. To be honest, I'm sorry, I'm being a little harsh here. I've worked with Citi. I've never seen this kind of, net banking issues. For almost 4 years, I was with the bank. One-off is fine. I think it's almost becoming a rule. So I think the banks need to take cognizance of this, that regulator, and I think we haven't started fining yet. Look at US, the way they fine. I mean, look at the track record of Citi or Barclays and how much fines they have paid in the last 5 years. You get to understand how serious this is.
So fine, at least they've not been fined yet, but the fact is that this is also going to impact Kotak Mahindra Bank quite a bit. In fact, I want Abizar's view on this. 2 ways of looking at this, Abizar. Is the RBI giving out a message to others, long overdue, their action, or, is Kotak Mahindra Bank now giving the impression that they didn't really listen to the RBI for 2 years? Do you think the regulator is being too harsh?
So, if I were to wear a regulator's hat, I think there is nothing excessive as long as I'm trying to be conservative. If I take a company's hat, I would say that one needs to innovate faster. See, in every situation, the company would be innovating much faster than you expect the regulator to innovate itself. So there is a gap. Now, what I would do as a regulator is not say that this, I would not interpret this to be excessive. I would say that the regulator is concerned. There is skepticism at the regulator, and the skepticism is always justified because you are entering into newer territory. And to stabilize that territory, there will be 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. It will happen. And I think that is the constructive process in itself. What the banks have to do, or the financial institutions have to do, as well as the regulator has to do, is to take it as a constructive process and make sure that both sides are open to what they hear and then arrive at a consensual remedial process. Because it's not that the banks are fully correct. It's not that the regulator is fully correct. And somewhere in between is a discovered process that can happen through dialogue.
Yeah.
Because the regulator has a different level of comfort, the bank will obviously have a different level.
Okay, so that was a safe middle path kind of answer, Abhizar. But the fact is, in this particular case, you've had quite a bit of skirmishes between Uday Kotak and the regulator on various issues. Just on the stance of the regulator, I want to ask Ashwin Parekh his view. There are 2 ways of looking at it, Mr. Parekh. One is, was the regulator too harsh? One was that, yes, at least in this case, the bank definitely deserved it. What would you say?
Sure. So let's look at it this way. I would certainly say that the regulator is not being harsh at all. And look at the other environments. Let's look at stockbroking, for example. If you look at SEBI regulations and if you look at the way, both the bosses work, each and every broker is expected to report technology glitches on a regular basis on their own to begin with. And if they find that there have been outages more than a certain period, then immediately the bosses as well as SEBI, they put penalties on the companies, on the brokers. Now, RBI does something similar. Each and every bank is expected to report all the outages, all the technology glitches, as it is termed, and they're supposed to report to them. So what may have happened, perhaps, is that the outages which are quoted, let's say, in the communication, may not just be that. It may be more than those outages. And if it took HDFC Bank, let's say, about a year, as you suggested, let's not forget it was during COVID period. Now I'm sure, very confident that Kotak Bank will be able to do it much faster. Maybe they've already put some measures already, because the communication that the CEO has put out does suggest that they may have put some action into this. But to my mind, if you say, was the regulator harsh? I don't think so.
Yeah.
The regulator has to worry about the system.
If anything, they were allowed to continue onboarding customers even when it was apparent for 2 years that your basic systems were not ready or weak, or the infrastructure was weak. And it's no surprise to anyone that the quantum of digital transactions has blown up. We've seen that trend coming. So a lesson here for Kotak Mahindra Bank, but I'm going to wrap up with what Gurmeet said. If HDFC and Kotak Mahindra Bank are found deficient by the regulator, then the others really pull up their socks. These are some of the top banks which have been in the regulator's crosshairs. That's all the time we have on this special show, but stay tuned. A lot more coming up on the other side on NDTV Profit.
Have you been struggling with your personal finances? You're not alone. There are a lot of people out there that find it difficult to manage their money. But on Big Decisions, we'll be discussing a variety of topics that will help